We hear a lot about terminals at Heathrow and extra landing areas in Stansted. We hear nothing, as far as I'm aware, about London Southend Airport. Today that will all change. And we have the Managing Director. I'm very pleased to introduce Alastair Welsh, the Managing Director at London Southend Airport.
Well, thank you very much indeed. London Southend Airport, where is it? I have to it's the postcard. I have to address. When I was thrilled, Ron, to give you an invitation today, because for years I used to commute into London on a train that said Upminster on the front of it. And I'd never been to Upminster before.
Only one in the world.
I have indeed been missing something, the meatballs, and other things. But seriously, my hope is that one day you may have the opportunity and the interest or the inclination to make the journey down the 127 to Southend and be able to use the airport there. And what I'd like to do today, if I can, is just briefly, without being too off put by a camera I see in my corner, it's like my wedding day, is to give you a bit of a flavour of what used to go on at Southend. Ron can say more than I, but a bit about what goes on now, and then give you a bit of a flavour of what my hope is we'll be doing going forwards into the future. And I guess first things first, what I didn't realise until I joined the place about a year ago at Southend, was Southend in the 60s was the third busiest airport in the UK. So it's doing 697,316 passengers, approximately. Also, in 1967. So it was the third busiest airport in the country. And then a whole load of things then happened, which were a combination of, I would suggest, not particularly good organisation and management, aircraft getting bigger, rules changing and so on, which meant that essentially it declined over time to a state around about 10 years ago where essentially it was offering services to pretty much no one on scheduled aircraft at all. Where the airport's at today, it is, as a business, one of the biggest employers in Southend. There are about 1,400 people who work on the airport at the moment, and it's one of the country's biggest bases for aircraft maintenance. It's one of the few places in the UK that you can fly an aircraft in, you can have any type of checks that you want done with it, like a service with a car, you have sort of from a minor one to a main one. So any type of service you like, from a quick sort of oil change through to take the whole thing apart, check every single aluminium in there, replace what you need to, put it back together again. You can also replace the avionics there, because of the avionics specialisation we've got. You can refit the interior, because there are interior specialists there, and then you can repaint it and fly it out again. And because you can do it all in one place, it means it's pretty cheap. And so that works quite well for airlines. So that's a big part of the business there. We also have a company called IPECO based on airport. I'd never heard of IPECO until I went there a year ago. Private company. They employ around about 500 of our staff at the airport. And they manufacture aircraft seats. So, no big deal. They specialise in cockpit seats. And they actually manufacture, I say all, they manufacture about 98% of all of the cockpit seats that Boeing use globally. So any Boeing aircraft, 737, 456, 787, their seats in there, the cockpit seats, are made in Southend. And it's one of those things that people don't really pick up about. There's an awful lot that goes on there, which works very well. One of the features of the Southend, because it is flipping quiet, is that for an airline, it means you haven't got a lot of congestion that you have at somewhere like Stansted or Heathrow or Gatwick. And Ford have a big operation shuttling staff to and from Cologne from the UK. And they've been based at Stansted for many, many years. And last year they moved their operation from Stansted down to Southend. They sold all the aircraft they used to have at Stansted, and they bought a new one which is best suited for Southend. And they transfer 90 people twice a day to and from Cologne from Southend, as part of their daily corporate shuttle. And it's a popular service, it works well, but for them, they reckon that they save around about $20,000 a week in operating costs operating out of Southend over what they did at Stansted. And that's purely fuel and runtime of the engines, because the congestion they haven't got of waiting on the ground to take off, and when they come into land, they haven't got a circle of range and age where they can come down. It saves about $20,000 a week, I reckon. And it's that sort of thing which going forwards are going to become more important. Today, we're a big employer for maintenance. We have a lot of corporate work, business jets. Those of you with business jets, you'll know it's a very fine airport, business jets. Those of you without them, get one, I recommend it. I don't have one, but I borrow yours. Based at Southend, there is no other place.
Alan's getting a second one.
And from a passenger point of view, you can fly to Jersey twice a week in the summer, and that's it. Various reasons for that, but essentially any airport, as far as I'm concerned, it needs two things. The first one it needs is a good catchment area. Southend actually has a far better catchment area than someone like Stansted. It's got 380,000 people within 20 minutes of the airport. And any airport in the southeast can start saying things like, you know, within a 2-hour drive, you've got up to 1 billion people you have anywhere in the southeast. But Southend is surprisingly well served in terms of catchment. But the thing that is rubbish for Southend at the moment is connectivity. The connectivity, that the means you have to get to and from the airport simply isn't good enough. The A127, I can pretend to any airline, is the best surface road in the UK, and obviously I'll be lying appallingly. But increasingly, railways are important. The airport, long-term, the future as I see it for the airport, has a real place for inbound business traffic for London and traffic from London out into Europe. And there are two railway lines, as you know, go to Southend. One of them, the Liverpool Street line, goes to Southend Victoria, and it goes right past the airport, but doesn't stop, which isn't very helpful. And the airport, I have to say, amazingly secured planning permission about 12 years ago to build a railway station on the airport, and it hasn't built it. So the good news is we've set up what we call our phase 1 of our development, which is very, very simply trying to make the most of what the airport's got at the moment, because people locally at Southend can remember what it was like when the airport was busy and when they couldn't fly from there, and frankly they'd like to be able to do it again. So we're getting on with making some changes to the current terminal. It hasn't changed much in the last 50 years, so it's time to make some changes, and we're doing those at the moment. We're building a new railway station, and that railway station will give us a better rail link to Liverpool Street than there is from Stansted. And that opens next summer, in September next year. We're also building a new control tower and putting a 4-star hotel on site. One of the more interesting features, or not, of Southend as a place is that it has 6.4 million visitors a year, of whom 6.1 million are day visitors. No one spends the night, or very few do. We can debate why that might be, but one of the more interesting things is the hotels in Southend, and any of you own a hotel there now, I apologise, but the hotels there frankly are shocking. They're not good enough. And we open a 4-star Ramada hotel on site at the airport next summer. And my hope is that when we've opened one, there'll be a number of others that come up fairly soon. The Southend needs a better stock of hotels and beds, and we need to make sure we get on and create that. So there are things that we are doing now to get on with making the most of the airport as it is. The most peculiar thing about Southend is there is a church to one side of the runway. And luckily it's not at the end of the runway, because that would be quite difficult. But it is moderately close to the side of the runway, and the runway is short. And I mean, it's really quite short. It's about a quarter the length of Heathrow's runways, roughly. And for the last 30 years or 20 years, the airport's been trying to see how it might be able to make a slight change in the way the runway is classified, which basically would mean that the runway declared length could be longer, even though the runway itself is very much the same length. And sorry?
Why?
Are you a lawyer? Quite simply, the way that obstructions are classified means we have to declare this in various ways. And we've gone through a long discussion with the CAA, who regulate airports the last year, and we're very pleased they've now come up in the last 6 months and said they would be happy to support a longer runway at Southend without having to demolish the church. Because for many, many years, people have been saying we we'd like to extend the runway, and we've knocked the church down, and that hasn't been very helpful. I believe the only Grade 1 listed building in Southend is that church. Southend is currently looking to build its credentials as a cultural centre, so knocking down the only Grade 1 listed building wouldn't be a good idea. We don't plan to do that. What we do plan to do is to, over the next couple of years, with the railway station in place, with the hotel in place, and some minor changes around the perimeter generally, our aim is to put a very, very small, about 200 metre extension on the end of the runway, which will give us a balanced runway without line. So it's the same direction, it's the same length in each direction. That's the key piece, because at the moment it's longer in one direction than the other. Strange but true. And our aim is to extend it, and in extending it and making it what's called more balanced, it means that we'll be able to offer services for airlines like people like EasyJet and that sort of thing. So we'll be able to offer European getaways to people who live in Southend and who want to get away, as well as people who want to get into London from Europe. From an airline point of view, you save a fortune in fuel burn and engine costs because you haven't got the congestion of the London airspace. From a passenger point of view, if you go into Europe, there's something strange that I find peculiar. I was in Geneva yesterday, and I was frustrated as heck that I had to drive for about 40 minutes into London City, then fly back over where I'd just come from. And there's something about going in the direction of travel that does shorten the journey. And the other piece is, what we'll be able to guarantee, because of the way the airport's set up at Southend, is a very quick turnaround time for airlines and passengers, which will again work well. So that is work that we're kicking off at the moment. We're very focused on making sure that the Thames Gateway has London City at one end, which is a very nice airport and increasingly congested, and Southend at the other end of the gateway, and our aim is to make sure we can develop that to have a better balance of airports within the gateway. I think it's fair to say, from a government policy point of view, there's a recognition of what it could do, but what we need to do is go on and deliver it. We want to be in a position, I want to be in a position, that we get to a maximum of about 2 million passengers. So this is not a Heathrow or a Stansted. This is an airport something like Southampton, if you're familiar with that as well. It's a nice regional airport which works well for people in the area. Our aim is to get on with that. One minor issue, I saw that I recognise the Rotarians are well known for their fundraising. If any of you feel you'd like to put your hand in your pocket for about 38 million quid, that's what I need to raise to make sure we can get on with the developments we're talking about right now. What I'm very pleased at is I've agreed with the owner of the airport. The best option for the business going forward is that we should sell it to an organisation who have the funds that we need to get on. And we started that process in January of this year, and we're due to conclude it in the next 6 weeks. And the people that we're talking to, we've gone from about 50 organisations, we're now down to the final 4 or so. But any one of those that we choose, they have the wherewithal that we need to make sure we can realise the potential of the airport. It'd be inappropriate to comment at all. I don't comment on speculation. I read in the press that London City Airport were going to buy it for £100 million, which is interesting. I now know not to do what I read in the press. But no, I think it's fair to say, having been with BAA when it was bought by the Spanish, I have nothing against Spanish at all, but I did leave BAA fairly quickly after that, because they had an interesting approach to planning laws, and not one I described. But certainly whatever we do, we'll do it correctly, that's for sure. And I could talk, I guess, for ages about Southend and what it's done in the past, what it could do in the future. But essentially, just to be useful to let you know that there is an airport down the road right now which is pretty quiet. If you have your own aircraft, do feel free to use it. It's very good value. But going forwards, my aim is to make sure that we can have an airport that Southend can be proud of again, and also that South Essex can be proud of. And my hope is that people in Upminster going forwards may choose to make use of it as we have services that are useful. It'll take a while, but my hope is within the next 3 years' time, whatever we do, I want to make sure in Southend that we have something that we can offer come the Olympics, that we can say actually people will now come to Southend who wouldn't otherwise have come to the area, and they'll use the airport to get into the Olympics, but then they'll come back because they're recognised as quite a nice place. People do not come to Essex enough as tourists or visitors, or come to stay or base businesses there. And we have an awful lot to do to make sure we can overcome some prejudices. And one of the aims I have is to make sure that we can use the Olympic opportunity to really make sure the airport is in place and up and running, and we can make sure it's a really efficient airport for that. But that's all I was going to say.
comments and objections as the bigger airports.
No. What's interesting, one of the things that's peculiar about Southend is that the... Sorry?
They're all deaf.
We're on camera, I can't possibly comment. One of the keys is the airport was very busy in the 60s.
Yes, right.
And people have a real recognition, and they can remember that the town was thriving when the airport was thriving. We put a sort of a leaflet out to 50-odd thousand households in Southend in November last year, really just saying, here are our plans. And please tell us what you think. And from my experience at Stansted, we used to send out 30,000 of those at Stansted, and we would get over 10,000 responses back which were negative. It was truly phenomenal. At Southend, of 50-odd thousand that went out, we had 500 responses, of which 10 were in any way negative. So both people didn't feel moved to comment at the time, and those that did were very positive. That's at one level. As you drill into it, if you look at what the noise disturbance normally is, it's normally concerns without knowing what the story is. Southampton has about 2 million passengers now in more congested space, so houses closer to the airport than there are to Southend. And it has universal support for what it does because of the way they approach the community. And we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we can get that right. But it's a real risk. We're not going to be flying jumbo jets in. And also what's strangely helpful for us is at the moment for maintenance, the aircraft that can come into the airport for maintenance are flipping big ones, because you don't have to apply by the same rules when you haven't got passengers on board. So we have 757s and more coming in for maintenance regularly, and they make a heck of a noise because they're old, they're noisy and so on. And the modern passenger jets are far quieter and far smaller. And so people, they both remember what it's like when it's busy, and they know what big aircraft are like because they see them now. And the aircraft they're going to have more of will be much smaller than that. And the final piece is that the maintenance aircraft normally come in between midnight and 4 in the morning. And frankly, passenger movements almost exclusively will be daytime. So there are a whole load of reasons why, if we get it right, we can continue to have the support that I think we'll get, but there's a risk.
Yes, the warning no, because of course since the city airport has been developing, I was interested in your comment that it's now becoming congested, because sitting in my back garden, which used to be directly under the flight path from it, I noticed a considerable increase, particularly in what they usually call the whispering jets.
Yes.
Top, and I presume they're the things you'll be aiming at, the smaller.
They're much quieter than that.
Well, the ones you've got.
No, that's right. Going forward, say a 319, for example, is about 40% quieter than a whispering jet. A 195, the new Embraer, that's about 35% quieter. So they're quieter, but I guess you'll have them overhead at about 2,000 to 3,000 feet. They'll be with us at both ends of the runway. They're over the sea within 1,000 feet. So basically, they might annoy some wind turbines, but in one direction there are about 40 houses before the sea, and the other direction there are houses, but it's about a quarter mile of houses in the sea.
I appreciate you that close.
So it is a concern, and we get more noise complaints from North Kent than we do from Essex.
Well, there are more deaf people living in Southend than anywhere else.
Because
they are all retired people, and of course they are not poor hearing.
One of the interesting things you had in the 60s at Southend were Bristol freighters,
Indeed.
which would fly in a car to Switzerland, France.
Theirs.
So would that be a viable financial exercise? I don't know whether the aircraft even exists these days.
That's a short answer? No. I guess if it was viable, people would do it now, but in practice, I guess the modern equivalent of that is you have your own business jet and you send your own car ahead. It's probably the equivalent. It's a lovely idea. It was in, I think Bond put his Aston Martin in Thunderbird or something, I think. Built at Southend a few years ago. But I think the short answer is lovely idea, but I think it's one of his memories.
Good try.
So you don't see an airport being built in the estuary?
No, if I explain why, an airport in the estuary, from a planning point of view, is a fantastic idea. The financial reality is if you were to build an airport in the estuary, the government would never do it because they wouldn't somehow whatever the sum is they want to think about, that they wouldn't pay for that. And if you're a private enterprise going to do it, the only way it would work, because don't forget Stansted ain't far away, and they've got a lot of scope for growth there. So if you're going to make an airport work in the estuary, what you would need to happen...
Well, there is,
Keep
Oh,
the birds away.
Good bird scaring, very important. But what you would need to happen is you need to do what they've done in Hong Kong and they've done in Athens, is when you open a new airport, you close the old one. So you would need to close Heathrow at the time you opened the new one. That's the only way you would make a large airport work. Because Gatwick and Stansted aren't big enough players. And Gatwick and Stansted combined are still smaller than Heathrow. So you need to close Heathrow, and in reality, you can imagine how long that legal challenge would go on for all those companies based around Heathrow. And I can never see that happening. So I think in the 70s, that would be the time to do it and get on with it, and to cap Heathrow in planning terms, around 20 million passengers, no more, and now building the estuary. And now I think it's too far gone. But I'm not sure the answer is third runway Heathrow though, because it is truly congested there.
I've got a three-part question here.
I should check that. One part will be enough.
Is it possible to reroute the railway? Because as I recall, the railway line runs virtually across the airport and does in fact impair take-off times and so on, spaces I mean. Is it possible to move the railway? What's the largest aircraft you could get in from a commercial point of view? And would the airport be able to handle such numbers as, say, Ryanair or EasyJet or one of those companies who you would like to get to be based there?
Right. How do we have?
Yes, no.
Remind me, the first question was?
The largest aircraft.
No, sorry, runway. Railway. The railway line goes, I'll show you a picture in a minute. The railway line goes along the perimeter. The difficulty was when they introduced electrification and gantries came up, that became an obstacle. But the bigger obstacle is actually a flipping gradient hill at the other end of the runway. So it's the hill that's the bigger issue than the railway line. Technically railway lines can be moved, practically doesn't work, and it's voters who get upset about railway lines, so we'll leave it where it is. And we can extend the runway without the railway line being an issue. Takes on to the second point, largest aircraft. Largest aircraft that we have today, again, aircraft size is a function of how far you want to go. Because the further you want to go, the more fuel you need, the more weight you've got, the more lift you need to get up in the air, the more lift you need, the more speed you need, and that's why the rubber leg comes in. And so we will, for example, have the Ford aircraft is an RJ100, which takes 110 passengers, although it's in luxury trim for 90 passengers only. And that will go, current runway, that can go to south of France. So it can go 700 miles. Larger aircraft, a 737, say 300 with 150 seats on it, that can only go at 400 miles. So you can take fairly big aircraft, but you can't get very far with it. But if you work at the base at the moment, we can do about 120 passengers around about 600 miles, so about to south of France. And with about 200 metres more on the runway, that same aircraft that can go 600 miles to south of France can go 1,200 miles to North Africa. And that's the difference that 200 metres can make. So size does matter, gentlemen. The final question, I think, was the Ryanair EasyJet question. On EasyJet, their aircraft have about 150 seats, and those aircraft could go quite comfortably on a slightly longer runway, not currently, but a slightly longer runway. They could do about 2.5-hour sectors. So they can comfortably do Faro, and they can comfortably do anywhere in Europe, pretty much. Ryanair, their aircraft are slightly bigger, 737-800, about 190 passengers. I know Mark O'Leary very well from my time at Stansted, and we're very honest with each other, and I've told him he's never, ever, ever going to walk out of Southend, and he understands that. He's a very good businessman. He's never, ever anyone to have owing you any money, particularly if you're a small company. So, lovely guy, he'll never operate out of us. But someone like EasyJet, Air Berlin, FlyB, he'll have quite possibly.
What would be your maximum number of passengers which you could handle with an extended term?
150.
No, I mean overall near
at port. Realistically, it's a function of as you appreciate the demand and so on, but I would see us initially trying to get to about 2–2.5 million passengers in the next 15 years. Eventually, Southampton, that I think is a very good comparison for us, they aim to get to about 6 million passengers or so eventually. But yeah, it's never going to be the 24 million that Stansted is, or the 68 million that Heathrow is.
Are the landing charges different at Southend to these major airports? So you've made a cost saving on that as against just fuel?
Oh, you assume it's cheaper at Southend?
I don't think so, yeah.
Why?
It's a smaller airport, your operating costs are less.
Well, you have to have the same standards as all airports. So you have the same fire service, the same runway standards, the same radar and so on. And yet we might have, for argument's sake, 2 or 3 commercial rooms a day, which nation have to pay for all of that. Whereas at Heathrow you might have, literally 2 or 3 a minute, or in 5 minutes if you like. So actually, the cost, the marginal cost of operating is lower, but equally the actual core cost is still very similar. Stansted have 11 firefighters across the clock. We have about 9. So actually, the costs are terrifying running an airport.
So, generic question: what do you see the future of these platinum type services with aircraft, whether it's carrying fewer passengers and gold service operating?
The sort of the business class only type
Business
thing.
class upwards.
Silver Jets and EOS and MaxJet and so on. I have to say, I think it's far too early to say. It's like if you look through any sort of business school study over time, and someone have an idea, everyone will go for it, and the market consolidates. So whether you have car production, there were thousands of car manufacturers 100 years ago, and they've now consolidated to a handful essentially. The market picks up. Economically buoyant times, oil pretty cheap, aircraft second-hand very cheap, and MaxJet took their aircraft from Qantas. They were parked in the desert for Qantas, so they were pretty cheap to get hold of. EOS aircraft are a bit different, but all of these aircraft were very cheap to get hold of, quite expensive to run, fuel's now very expensive, and there's consolidation. What's difficult for them is that they've got Lufthansa and now British Airways starting to do it themselves. And the beauty of people like Lufthansa and British Airways is they have their own loyalty schemes. And the power of air miles are phenomenal for executives. And that's what essentially what's killed people like MaxJet and EOS, is people in Britain saying, why should I go to you? It's cheaper, but I don't pay.
Right.
And so I think what will happen is, as the market consolidates, then we will see a number of the big airlines operating their own business class only operation. And I was with KLM yesterday, who were looking at their own business jet division to offer you for a business class fare a business jet for 2 or 3 of you, and they're trying to work out how they can differentiate it but still get the margin.
Have we got any other questions? Otherwise, I will ask. Oh, sorry, Alan.
Can you tell me if you're ever likely to get that Vulcan off your property?
I hope not. And the reason I hope not is because it's never going to fly out of there.
I know.
So if it leaves there, it'll either go out in a skip or otherwise. And my hope is it doesn't go out in a skip. So my hope is we can keep it there. But that there's a rather interesting V-bomber there, a Vulcan, which was landed there I think about 20 years ago or so. Didn't do a lot for a while. And some of the maintenance guys who work at the airport, who have a love of aircraft, have been getting it going again. And it does high-speed taxi runs once or twice a year. Although it hasn't for the last year or so because it needs some fairly big work on the engine. And they'll sort of start one end of the runway, set off and head off down the other end of the runway, get a bit worried, rotate, panic, put the brakes on, put the parachute out, and hope they can stop. The last time they got the calculation a bit wrong. It went into the soft, I understand, but that was fine. But I don't think it's ever going to fly again. And for me, it would be a shame if it was. I can't see it going anywhere and being useful, if you like, for anyone. At the moment, it has a lot of support from people like EDA and other organisations, and it has a massive role with local schools and communities who come and are shown around it, and they're only helped to understand what the Cold War was all about. and it's a really powerful tool. Whenever schools come to the airport, they want to see the north, and they want to understand what it's all about, because people forget what the Cold War really happened. And my hope is we can keep it there as long as we can, because we're supporters of it, and I think it's got a real future to play.
Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned you had sort of support locally in terms of the planning issues, but have you got the support of the local authority in the South East Regional Planning?
Yes.
And I was wondering about the issues of the environment and concern with the public about increased air noise.
And the short answer is it is supported by, from a policy level, by either Joe East, the Government Office of the East, Mayor of London, strangely, did, the East Development Agency, Thames Gateway, government. So generally it is supported. It's in the local development framework of both Rochdale and Southend, the board of the two councils. And there's now a joint area action plan, which is now in Regulation 25-26 consultation, supporting specifically a runway extension scope. So there is support for it at various policy levels. And part of my job has to be to make sure that we take the environmental piece seriously and that we mitigate appropriately. At the moment, for example, we have controls on the number of Vickers Viscounts that can use the airport at night. Some of you may know they were basically out of service about 30 years ago, and they were truly noisy aircraft. But on aircraft which we operate today, we have no controls on at all. So we, in theory, could operate 757s all night every night, and no one would have a right to complain against the licence. What I want us to do is put in place a whole new set of operating conditions for the airport, because there has to be a trade-off in that. And if I'm going to frankly have more aircraft more frequently, then it seems sensible that frankly at the very least I should make sure that the incremental business takes place during the day and not at night. But there's work for us to do on that, but I think it will be.
You wouldn't have understood a word of that.
Then to know them, give it a run to give the official